I'm going to show you how to sew in a concealed zip. At the top I've just put 2 pins to mark my seam allowance. I've overlocked the raw edges and I've pressed in my seam allowance on both sides and then gently unpressed it, so I've got a fine line that I can follow. This is a concealed zip. It has a little pulley at the top, and as you can see, you can't see the teeth from the right side. So all you should see once it's set in is the coil. So starting with the left hand side, I'm going to sew the left hand side of the zip in first. So I place the little plastic end of the zip in line with my pin, and then I'm going to place the plastic coils along the seam allowance guide, and I'm going to pin it into place. Okay, just securely pin your zip into place, making sure the coils run along the pressed line as your seam allowance guide. Okay, put in a third pin, and that should hold the zip into place nicely. Okay, we're ready to sew. So I'm going to tack it in first, so I'm going to go for a big stitch, the biggest stitch the machine does, and then I'm going to just tack the zip into place, removing the pin at the top and removing the pins as I sew down. It doesn't matter where you sew down of the zip in at this point. This is just a tacking stitch to hold it into place for when I sew it in a little while with the correct stitch length. So just tack the zip into place. You can remove this tacking stitch once the zip is in place if you don't want to see it at the back of the zip. So go as far as you can. Sometimes you can go to the bottom of the zip tape, sometimes you can't, and you can just stop just before the pulley. So once it's tacked into place, it's no longer going to move, and it's going to make my life easy. Now I want to sew it in properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the coils to one side as I sew it in. So first of all, I need to go back to a normal stitch length. On my machine, it's between 2 and 2.5. So starting at the top, I'm going to pull the coils to the left, and I'm going to sew as close as I can to the plastic coils. So I need to do a little back stitch here to hold the zip into place, and then as I sew, I'm just going to gently pull the teeth to one side and sew next to the teeth. Go sew down as far as you can. You can't get to the pulley because the pulley gets in the way, so you have to back stitch here. So when you buy a concealed zip, it should always be approximately 4 centimeters longer than you need it to be. As you can see here, the zip is in place on the left hand side, so I just have the right hand side to sew. Again, so I need to line the zip right sides together, so turn the zip over, making sure I've got the right side of the zip to the right side of the fabric, lining it up at the top with the left hand side and the pin, so the little plastic stopper at the top is in place, and then I'm going to pin down the side of the zip. So as I said, you must make sure your zip is 4 centimeters, at least 4 centimeters longer than you need it for the opening, because you cannot sew all the way down. Here I'm pinning it into place, and I'm lining up the coils again on the right hand side to match my pressed line on my fabric. So I'm going to tack this side in. So go for the biggest stitch, and then I need to change my zip foot to the zip foot with the eye to the right this time. So my machine's an industrial machine, so it takes a little while. As you can see, the zip foot has got the eye to the right this time. You can buy a proper concealed zip foot, but if you don't have one, but you have a left and a right zip feet, then you should be absolutely fine. So make sure your foot's on nice and tightly, and your threads are to the back. So now I'm going to sew the right hand side of the zip, exactly the same as the left hand side. Firstly, I'm going to tack it into place. So once you've tacked the right hand side, you can actually check that the zip is in place properly before you sew it the second time. If you're quite confident, you can just tack it into place and then sew it along the zip coils properly afterwards. So remove your pins as you go and tack it into place the same as the right hand side. The reason I tack it into place is because when I go to sew it properly with a smaller stitch, I don't have to hold on to the fabric and the zip at the same time. It's tacked and it's not going to move. Go back to a smaller stitch, and then I'm going to sew in the right hand side. So I'm going to pull the teeth or the coils to the right, and then I'm going to sew as closely as I can, not forgetting to backstitch at the top, down the right hand side of the zip. Exactly the same as the left hand side. I'm just pulling the teeth, as you can see, to the right and sewing as closely as possible, and then go as far as you can before hitting the pulley, and then do a little back stitch. Once you've done that, we're going to sew the seam together at the bottom of the zip. So usually with a concealed zip, you sew the zip in and then you sew the seam. I'm going to zip the zip up to make sure the zip fits properly. So looks quite nice. Okay, it fits at the top. It looks really smooth as I go along there. I'm quite happy with that. If I wasn't, I'd have to unpick it, but I am quite happy. So now I need to pin at the very bottom of the zip, the two sides together, pin as close to this vinyl seam as possible, because I'm going to sew my seam from the zip down. So just pin as close as you can, check both sides, and if it's okay, then I'm going to sew it. So it's a little bit tricky getting the machine foot under there, but once you're under there, try to get the machine foot as close to the seam as possible, the previous seam. Remove your pin because it will get in the way, and then I'm going to do a little forwards and back stitch to make sure it doesn't come apart here. It can be quite tricky because the zip is quite bulky at the bottom, so take your time and just do a couple of stitches forwards and a couple of stitches back, and then you can very carefully sew the seam. If you want to do a proper job and you have a longer seam at the bottom, what I would do is you sew just past the zip and then you change your zip foot for a proper machine foot and put the machine foot on and continue down. Because mine is just a sample, I'm going to continue down with my zip foot, but for a better seam you should always put the machine foot back on. Clip your threads and then we'll have a look to see. So it looks quite nice. Needs a gentle press, so just check your seams are okay, not too wobbly, hopefully, and then it looks fine. And I can remove any threads, and I can remove my tacking stitches at this point if I want to, and just leave in the proper stitching.